Food. You're hungry. A lot, honestly. Yeah, a lot of music. Yeah, just gonna walk in a line. You have the line test, or I'm gonna walk first, and then you're.
We just put up the tent in this intense snowstorm. Well, windstorm, I should say.
Yeah, that's bomber, dude.
Yeah, that's pretty good. We got less good. 5,969 meters. And for those of you who that means nothing to,
Which is pretty much all of us.
19,583 feet above sea level.
Yes! Yes!
So tomorrow we go up to 22,000. What's the exact number?
I gotta get some food, I'm starving. And I think I have one more Snickers bar.
Okay.
Dude, I can't make senses ornaments.
Ask your question one more time.
I gotta get it. You guys gotta get me confusing.
Taylor, man.
You gotta get me. Music. No. Lot. Listen.
Music?
What?
Water.
Whiz on.
Whiz on.
I'm what one?
What is
It's
it?
so fun to laugh at it. It's so funny.
What's that?
Slam that, dude.
So for high altitude climbing like this, they do have small, small hyperbaric chambers that they can put an individual into and zip up with a clear plastic over their
I need to
face
get
area so
some
they can
BB.
check on them. So bring increase the pressure
I need
and
some
then bring it
drugs.
down to a lower
Drugs. Drugs.
Dymox?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Do you have any other symptoms besides slip speech?
I can't talk normal voice.
Does your head hurt?
No.
Are you dehydrated? Do you feel thirsty?
I kind of need
Food. You're hungry. A lot, honestly. Yeah, a lot of music. Yeah, just gonna walk in a line. You have the line test, or I'm gonna walk first, and then you're gonna walk after me?
I remember it.
Yeah, we're gonna do that.
Exit.
Your lungs hurt? Be short of breath?
A lot of times they will have decreased urine output because they're retaining fluid that
You're not short of breath?
increases their risk for pulmonary and cerebral edema.
I feel good.
Okay.
But I just can't talk.
Yeah.
But I can start again. Talk.
Okay.
I can't talk.
So the next video
Camera's
is
going on.
of
Look at this thing, man.
It sounded like it was raining because the snow was hitting the tent so hard. And then there's probably been about 6 or 7 massive lightning and thunderbolting right above her.
So when people are doing high mountain altitude climbing, you've probably heard of base camps. And so that gives their body time to acclimatize. And one of the events occurring, of course, is the production of more red blood cells due to erythropoietin, because each red blood cell can't completely saturate, so you need more of them. There's also shifts in compartments where the fluid is located, so the body undergoes those adaptations. There is the Air Force maintains a center at Andrews Air Force Base near Washington, D.C., Maryland. This is not there, but it's a similar procedure where pilots are trained to recognize symptoms of hypoxia, and while they can't change the hypoxia, recognize the symptoms and practice reacting under those conditions. So this is a video of
This is a risky experiment, as unconsciousness can occur quite suddenly.
looking at a chamber of
What's a sudden Sorry.
And this is what we call regular pressure. Just recover.
CO2 that they put in through.
Tell me what you're experiencing. Little bit giddy. Yeah, a little bit lightheaded.
Physiologist Dr. Hans Wittenberg is monitoring Michael's condition by asking him to complete basic tasks.
Can you show me by sticking up your fingers how much 9 minus 5 is? 9 minus 5 would be 4. Excellent. Regards this. That's the ace of clubs. Excellent. Yeah.
Michael's brain is suffering from oxygen starvation, making him feel drunk, euphoric, and overconfident.
Can you hold this up for me? I can hold it up, yeah. And can you put the shape in it as well? Alright, I'm looking
An
for...
oval shape.
I can't see that one. Here. See? Okay. What kind of card is this? It's the 3 of diamonds. 3 of diamonds? Yeah. Got no shape to it. Can you put it in? Yes, it's the star. Yes.
Michael will eventually face an ultimate test. Will he be able to switch his oxygen back on and save his life? Or will he be too far gone to care?
How much is 8 minus 3? 8 minus 2 is 4. Is it 4? 8 minus 3. 8 minus 3 is...
Michael is dangerously hypoxic.
Okay. I need time to recover, Mike. Can you put up the switches? 6 minutes. Put up the switches. We will die.
Just swing the mask back on.
He's experiencing what appears to be the perfect method of execution, and he doesn't care.
Put up the switches. We will die. Put up the switches. Can you tell me how you feel now? How do you feel? I feel much better. Very good. How much is 8 minus 3? 5. Definitely. 5.
Oh, okay, Hans, thank you. Michael.
Where are we now, Captain?
Well, actually, we're descending now to sea level again. We are at 26,000 feet.
How much longer until I would get unconscious?
Well, a matter of seconds. I guess 10 to 20 seconds, and then
And from there to death?
that's your final destination then.
If Hans hadn't stepped in then,
He saved your life today.
okay.
Be very thankful.
Thank you.
But overall, Michael, was it painful?
I thought the experiment was a failure because I was getting all the answers right. Did I get all the answers right?
In the end, no.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought I was doing very well.
Yeah.
I outwitted you. I certainly felt self-confident. Obviously I did, because I said it would be one of the symptoms of hypoxia. And I had no idea that I was near death. And I was just, I was very happy, very happy. Hell of a way to go.
So if you're flying a plane and the plane decompresses and you're happy about it, it's not going to do much to change it, right?
Yeah.
All right, so here are, it's not completely understood exactly what's happening, but for Faith and for Hayes, some of the responses that the body occurs and one of the reasons why it stops when you get high pulmonary fluid is, as we discussed earlier, the constriction of those blood vessels and increased fluid loss. So the main thing is, in this training, is to get people, there are some things you can do, like I said, dexamethasone or some of the conditions, but back in 90, I believe it was 96, have you seen the film or read the book Into Thin Air by John Krakauer? It's on YouTube, the whole hour and a half of it, where 8 people died. It's an exploration of part of the problems of the commercialization of climbing Mount Everest. There were two. They're now commercial for people who are charged anywhere from $35,000 to $70,000 for 6 weeks of accompaniment through base camp and then to the top of Mount Everest. And one of the leaders, he'd never had a death in any of his excursions before. He had a postal employee who had tried, this is like his 3rd or 4th time to try to climb Mount Everest. And the leader of the group had a rule that he would not try to go up the last bit of summiting if it was after 4 o'clock. And he broke that rule to get this postal worker on his 3rd or 4th climb up to the summit, and they both ended up dying on the way back. There was a socialite in another group who paid about $100,000 and basically got dragged up the summit by the Himalayan native, a Sherpa, who ended up losing his life because of all the metabolic energy that he expended dragging her up the last 20 feet of the summit or so. And there's another man, an Australian doctor, who had had LASIK surgery prior to the climb, and low altitude can do a lot of things to your eyes, and he essentially couldn't see. Can you imagine trying to climb around Mount Everest when you can't see? And was left, his climbing partners, who was part of the group that lost most of the life, and was left behind for dead. They thought he was already dead, and he came to early the next morning with severe frostbite, and essentially crawled his way back down the mountain to the next base camp. He lost the tip of his nose and several fingertips. But he saved his own life because nobody was going back out looking for him. They thought he was already dead. And so it covers a whole bunch of things. The commercialization of Mount Everest, the problems that high altitude can have on your ability to think logically. There was an area where they would dump oxygen canisters to pick up on the way back, to use on the way back down. And one of the climbers who decided he couldn't make it to the top and was waiting there for everybody to come back was telling everyone that they were all empty. And they believed him. And so they went on without picking up these oxygen canisters. And so there's just a whole series of different errors that would never have happened if they had been at lower altitude. All right, so I found a bunch of other slides of other information, but I want you to know what ANS is, and HASTE and HAPE. And again, the altitude that people get these is going to vary from person to person, and will vary from time to time, even for that individual person. So for mild acute mountain sickness, you can take pain medications, you can take acetazolamide as a diuretic. If you start to have headaches or difficulty concentrating, all of these, beyond the mild, you descend immediately, all right? Because you can't get better staying at that altitude. And the practice now is to not, they used to sleep just a few hours, maybe a couple hours from the summit, and now at Mount Everest, they'll make multiple climbs up, especially the Sherpas will, and it's amazing how many times the Sherpas go up to deposit these caches of oxygen bottles, but they always come back down to sleep at a lower level. Because if you sleep at that higher level, you just spend the whole night essentially dying, because you don't have enough oxygen. You may wake up alive, but you're closer to death than when you fell asleep. All right, so let's take a look now at carbon dioxide. So yesterday we looked at oxygen transport. Remember, external respiration is the oxygen moving out of the alveoli into the blood and dissolving in the blood and binding to hemoglobin. And then internal respiration would be the oxygen, what we were looking at with the oxygen dissociation curve on the steep gradient. So when we look back to that oxygen dissociation curve, this would be external respiration for oxygen, and the steep gradient would be internal, where we're adding down the tissues. Okay? So oxygen had two mechanisms of transport. There's dissolved in the plasma as our PO2 and bound to hemoglobin. Right? We can increase the PO2 how? For oxygen. How can we increase the amount of oxygen that's dissolved in the plasma?
Breathe more?
More oxygen, not more air, but a higher concentration. So instead of 21%, 25 or 30 or 40%. Now oxygen itself can be toxic. All right, so you don't want to breathe 100% oxygen for a long period of time. That will actually cause blood vessels to constrict as they try to protect themselves, and then that can cause neurons to die in your eye. You can go blind from too high a concentration to the blood vessels. All right, so how do we increase hemoglobin saturation, or the transport of hemoglobin? Increasing PO2 will increase saturation, but if we're at 100% saturation, how do we increase hemoglobin transport? Make more hemoglobin. All right, so the erythropoietin effect. So people that live at high altitude have a higher hemoglobin, have a higher hematocrit. So for a short period of time, when they come to sea level, so every time my husband comes from Denver back to Sacramento, he should have more energy, right? He should be able to ride his bike with greater energy and for a longer period of time because he essentially has a greater number of red blood cells. So at sea level, he's going to be able to carry more oxygen to his tissues. So that's what a lot of cyclists and athletics people will do to train. You train at low you train at one level and you sleep at a different level. So you go up to high altitude to train and come back to low altitude to sleep. And that allows you to get your heart force and blood vessels acclimatized. All right, if we look at carbon dioxide, we have three methods of transporting carbon dioxide. The first two are similar in some degree to oxygen. So we have dissolved in the blood as a gas. And so this has a gas pressure, and this is PCO2. So partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood. Remember what our ranges were? So as carbon dioxide is moving from tissue cells as it's being produced, by the way, why do we have carbon dioxide produced by tissue cells? So carbon dioxide is moving from the cells. Anybody had glycolysis and citric acid cycle? Yeah, micro?
Yes.
Okay. Come on,
It's the
then.
final acceptor, right? Of
Right, well,
the
not the final acceptor, that's oxygen.
Okay.
So if we're taking glucose or fructose, how many carbons are in those simple sugars?
6.
6. All right, so in glycolysis, we don't release any carbon dioxide, but in the intermediate step, where we take a 3-carbon molecule, this, you don't have to know this right now, okay, we'll just discuss this the next to the last day of class. So in the intermediate, we end up doing glycolysis, which is an anaerobic step. We talked about that with muscle physiology. We don't need oxygen for that step to occur, and we make pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid is a 3-carbon molecule. We essentially take glucose or fructose, remove some hydrogens, split it in half, and we have 2 3-carbon molecules. Then we remove a carbon from each of those as we process it from the mitochondria, and that carbon is lost along with oxygen, so we release 2 carbon dioxide molecules. Then within the mitochondria, it goes through the citric acid cycle as it goes through a cyclic series of enzymatic reactions, and each cycle releases 2 more. So by the time we're done with the citric acid cycle, we have released 6 carbons and their accompanying oxygen as carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide that we are breathing out has come from the cells that are going through the citric acid cycle and releasing the CO2. We continue processing the hydrogen ions to get to the ATP. All right? But that's where the CO2 is coming from. So as CO2 diffuses into the blood, it forms a PCO2 that typically maximizes at 45 millimeters of mercury. So dissolved in the blood as PCO2. Then, within the blood, the carbon dioxide diffuses into the red blood cell. And it binds to hemoglobin. Does it compete with oxygen?
No.
No. It binds to the protein component of hemoglobin. All right, so not the heme, but the globin. As such, it affects the shape of the hemoglobin, and as we described yesterday, makes it more difficult for the oxygen to interact with the iron. Remember, it's one of the things that causes our shift to the right, is an increase in PCO2 binding to the carbon dioxide binding to the hemoglobin. So it's going to bind to hemoglobin, and it forms a molecule known as carboxyaminohemoglobin. That's no longer a gas, right? So when it's bound to the hemoglobin, it's not affecting the PCO2 because it's no longer a gas. And then the third, and most of the carbon dioxide forms carbonic acid. This is a very simple formula. I think you can all see this place here. So carbon dioxide, 1 molecule of carbon dioxide plus 1 molecule of water undergoes a reversible reaction to form, we put all of these together, H2CO3. So here we have H2, C, and 3 oxygens. Right, so it's a balanced equation. And this is carbonic acid. In the red blood cell, so this will occur in the red blood cell, and it will occur in the plasma. It occurs more rapidly in the red blood cell because the red blood cell has an enzyme known as carbonic anhydrase. And this interacts with the carbon dioxide in the water and causes this reaction to occur more rapidly in either direction. Now, carbonic acid doesn't stay as carbonic acid for every molecule. A few of them will undergo another reversible reaction to form hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. As we increase the number of hydrogen ions in the blood, what happens to our pH?
Up,
It
down.
becomes acidic. Okay? So that's how another mechanism by CO2 can affect the interaction between oxygen and iron is the pH. So CO2 can bind directly to hemoglobin and decrease the affinity between iron and oxygen, or it can form carbonic acid, increase the number of free hydrogen ions, and that can change the shape of the protein and make it more difficult for oxygen and iron to interact. Now, not all of the carbonic acid does this, all right? So only a few of the molecules will actually go to this form. The bicarbonate ion that's formed in the blood, in the red blood cell, undergoes a shift, it leaves, and is replaced by a chloride ion. So we're exchanging one negative ion for another. This is known as the chloride shift. And what it does is it makes the bicarbonate ion available as a buffer. So we'll go over this in a little bit more detail the last day of lecture for the urinary system when we talk about acid bases and buffers. All right? Carbonic acid is described as a weak acid. 1 molecule of carbonic acid releases 1 hydrogen ion. Hydrochloric acid is a very strong acid. Its pH is around 1 or 2. It also will release one hydrogen ion. So why is this considered to be a strong acid, whereas this is considered to be a weak acid when they both release the same number of hydrogen ions? Okay, you're on the right track. What do you mean by concentration?
Because if the pH is relative to how many hydrogen ions in the whole solution, so
Okay.
there's a higher amount of hydrogen ions.
So why would hydrochloric acid have a higher number of hydrogen ions?
Because it doesn't bind to
It completely dissociates. So it has a very weak attraction between the hydrogen and the chloride. So almost every single, if I have 100 molecules of hydrochloric acid, I'm going to end up with 100 ions in a solution. Only a few of the carbonic acids will dissociate. So with 100 molecules of carbonic acid, I only have 10. I'd have to check with chemistry what the exact number, hydrogen ions. So the difference is because of the ease with which the hydrogen ions are formed. But you're right, it is the concentration, but more of the hydrochloric acids are given up. All right, now this whole formula right here is concentration given. So in the tissues where I have a lot of CO2, I end up forming a lot of carbonic acid. When I get to the lungs, what am I doing with my CO2? It's moving from a PCO2 of 45, wherever I was, to a PCO2 in the alveoli of
40.
40. So as I lose CO2, that starts to drive this reaction the opposite direction. And my hydrogen and bicarbonate ions reform, my carbonic acid dissociates to CO2 and water, and I breathe off the CO2. Okay? Now, when we talk about acid-base balance, let's say somebody has pneumonia. And with fluid in the lungs, we've increased the diffusion distance. So we're well aware that we're not going to get as much oxygen into our blood, and our PO2 is going to drop. But on the contrast, we're not going to be able to deliver as much CO2 to the alveoli. So as the blood leaves the lungs, it's going to have a higher PO2, instead of PCO2. Instead of having a PCO2 of 40, because it's gotten rid of CO2 into the alveoli, we might have a PCO2 of 44, or 45, or 46. What is that higher PCO2 going to do to the pH of the blood? It's going to lower it. It's going to be more acidic. All right? We're going to talk about that on Tuesday when we talk about the control of breathing. What makes us breathe, what makes us breathe deeper or more rapidly. All right. So let's say now that somebody has diarrhea. We have a digestive system. But the stomach produces hydrochloric acid, which we absorb across our body walls, and to buffer that and to activate enzymes in the small intestine, the pancreas produces bicarbonate ions. So with diarrhea, we're more likely to lose the bicarbonate ions than the hydrogen ions. So if we have extensive diarrhea, we've gone to Mexico for spring break and something didn't agree with us, all right, and we have extensive diarrhea, we're going to lose bicarbonate ions. So the hydrogen ions that we're forming from carbon dioxide and the hydrogen ions that we absorb from gastric contents aren't going to be buffered. So what's going to happen to our pH in the blood? It's going to go up. It's going to go down because we're going to have too many hydrogen ions that aren't buffered. We're going to have too many free hydrogen ions. We have hydrogen ions from our hydrochloric acid, and we don't have the bicarbonate ions from the pancreas. What do you think is going to happen to your breathing?
We breathe faster.
You're going to breathe faster in an attempt to get rid of CO2. Are you getting rid of hydrogen ions? Are you breathing out hydrogen ions? No. You're breathing out CO2, but with less CO2, you're making less carbonic acid, and that's fewer hydrogen ions are being released. Okay? All right. Well, let's say the reverse. Let's say someone is pregnant and they have morning sickness that's extended into their 6th month. They haven't gotten over it. And they're vomiting every morning and all day long. They have to be hospitalized. So with all the loss of hydrochloric acid, because they're not absorbing it, they're going to go into alkalosis, all right? So what would happen to their respiratory rate?
That would slow.
It's going to slow down because they're going to try to keep carbon dioxide in an attempt to increase carbonic acid, to increase free hydrogen ions in the